classes. So I just open up my music store, I'll launch the server, and I'll close up all the files that I've got open. So here's our store. I'm not sure why this is taking so long. Okay, there we go. So we're going to modify our store details page a little bit. We'll add a little formatting, but most importantly, we need an add to cart button here. That's going to call an add to cart method. We also should add, so we've got the title, so we want add to cart buttons, and we'll also just do a little formatting. So let's open up our store details view. Go to store and details. So underneath our price, we'll create a button, an add to cart button. Our button will say add to cart. It will call an add to cart method. And we're going to create a new controller today. It won't be scaffolded. We're going to custom write the methods in there. We'll create a shopping cart controller. But we're going to need some parameters on here. So it will look like this. We've got add to cart, doesn't look great. I want to style it like a button. And all of these go to the same place, add to cart. But we're going to need a parameter. What value are we going to need in order to add to cart? Yeah, we need the product. We need the album ID. So let's add here a new parameter called album ID. And we'll set that equal to our album ID, right? And then the last parameter is we can attach HTML attributes, so we can attach a bootstrap class so it actually looks like a button. That part's optional, but I'll do it anyway. All the add to cart method we're going to write in the shopping cart controller, which we're going to create. That method will have an integer parameter called album ID. So these should appear as buttons. So now when I click, it calls shopping cart, add to cart, passes in the selected album ID as a parameter. Right now we get a 404 error, that's fine. Right, if I click a different album, I get the correct ID being passed along. Just in terms of formatting, I'm going to add a little bit of bootstrap to each article. So what we'll do is it'll display it as a grid, 3 albums at a time. I'll add a few classes here. I'll use IMG responsive, which will put it in kind of a square. Bootstrap has a 12-column grid system, so if I set each one as 4 columns wide, that will give me rows of 3 albums at a time. And I also want within each square, each album, I want to center it. It'll just look better if everything is centered in one album square. I'll just try this and see what this gives me. Should look a lot cleaner. Plus, we can see more products per page. Okay, we're close. Okay. Well, we should be able to do 4. Hang on, let's just looked good this morning, so I got to figure out what I did differently. I didn't use a row, although I could. Wouldn't be a bad idea. Let's just see.
You can generate rows in your for each week.
That's true. I'm just going to check. Oh, here's the wrong class. I want IMG thumbnail rather than IMG responsive. That'll fix it. Change responsive to thumbnail. So we shouldn't need to generate the rows. You know what? Here's the issue. Wherever the title wraps to the next line, it's causing a problem. So I'll just maybe move the artist name down below rather than putting it right there. So I've got an H3 for the title. Just move that over here. And I'll wrap the artist name maybe in a smaller heading, an H5. The title can be bigger than the artist name. I think that will fix our problem. So before we had them in one heading, now we'll have the album title in an H3 and the artist name in an H5. There, that works better. We could play around more. I think this is good enough. So our users can see 9 to 12 albums at a time. Things are kind of consistent, formatted, aligned nicely. Easy for us to separate one product from another now. So I don't think I'll change anything else on this page. This is, I think, good enough. So now we need to build our shopping cart controller. And eventually we're going to wind up with 3 methods in there, actually 4. We're going to have, obviously, we're going to write the add to cart method. We're going to need an index method that will display the shopping cart. We'll go and get the current contents of the cart, pass those to a view. We'll need a remove. I don't think we'll do an edit. We'll just do an add and a remove, just for simplicity. And then we also need, eventually, we're going to need a method to link items on one cart together. So when I come and hit add to cart on the first item, then hit add to cart on the second, we need a way of tracking that these 2 items belong to the same user. Because the carts are user specific. Now it's easy when our users are logged in, but most sites, they don't make you log in before you shop, right? Because a lot of people won't bother. I want to shop first as an anonymous user. And then if I like the price and I'm okay with your shipping and taxes, then I'll log in or register. So then we need a way, we'll also have to handle that next week. What happens when I shop anonymously, but then I go to check out, we now need to move my items from an anonymous user's cart into an authenticated user's cart. So we'll kind of deal with that part next week. So let's create the shopping cart controller. We're not going to use scaffolding. We're just going to manually build this controller. And then we're going to create an add to cart method. So inside of controllers, right click it. And we can add a controller, and we just want an empty control, an MVC5 empty controller. And call it shopping cart controller. So we have an index view already. That's good. We're going to use this to build a shopping cart index page that will show whatever's in the cart currently. But first, we may as well build add to cart because we got nothing to show until we can put items into the cart. So we'll start there. Now, when we scaffolded controllers, so here's our store manager, right? We scaffolded this one, and it has a couple things that our new controller doesn't have. It has a reference to the model namespace, and it has a global database connection in the class. We need both of these things. So we need to reference our model namespace, and we need a database connection. So this is the exact same code that scaffolding would give us. So now this connection is available for any of the methods, and our models are available. We're really only interested in one model. We haven't really looked at it or worked with it. So far, we've only been working with the album, artist, and genre models. We've been working with the catalog end of things. There are 3 other tables in our database and 3 models. So we need our cart model. So this gives us a picture of what the cart table looks like. It's got a primary key, which is auto-generated. It has a cart ID, which is required, the album ID, and the quantity, as well as a date and time stamp. So if a user is buying 5 items, they're going to have 5 records in the cart table. Each product is a unique item. Okay. So one of the things we're going to have to figure out, right? We have a few different scenarios. How are we going to relate these together? Well, they're related based on the cart ID. But we've got a couple of different scenarios. When somebody's logged in, it's easy. We'll just take their username and store it here. So if you're logged in as jazzpreet.gmail.com, every time you hit add to cart, we'll create a new record in the cart table, and the cart ID will just be your email address. That way, that cart also will persist. So if you don't check out, but you come back tomorrow and keep shopping, you go to the shopping cart page. Once you log in, we can show what you put in the cart today. With an anonymous user, it's a little more complicated because we don't know who they are. So we're going to have to, in that case, generate some kind of unique ID and then store it in a session variable. So as long as that user's browser is open, they can keep adding to cart, and we can, so if Roman's shopping anonymously, Roman can put multiple items in his cart and we'll store that ID. As soon as he closes his browser though, or comes back tomorrow, that shopping cart gets wiped out, right? Because it's no longer tied. We don't know whose it is anymore once that session's gone. So we'll have to kind of work through this logic a bit because we do have a few different scenarios. So what I'm going to do as I do this, I'm going to stay anonymous in Firefox, and I will log into the site in Chrome so that we can see the difference of how this works. Okay, so we need to write an add to cart method, right? And that add to cart method, we said, takes an integer. So what we want to do here is use the cart model. What should we do after the user adds to cart? What should they see after they add an item to their cart?
No.
Yeah, in their browser, what should happen? So when I go here, once I click this, what's the next thing I should expect to see? There's a few different ways sites handle it. Okay, so we could create a little pop-up or a message. We could, but we don't want to. If they want to add multiple, want to add more. Oh no, you know what? I bought one for you, but you know what? Maybe you'd like one. So we may not want to restrict them. Justin, what were you going to suggest?
Some sites have like little shop, little numbers.
Okay, so we could do that. Yep. What's the other thing we could do?
Go directly to the cart.
Yeah, we'll just redirect them. We already have an index method. So that index method will show the current contents of the cart. Not yet. First, we got to put stuff in. But we can take them to the cart index view after adding, where they can see the current cart, check out, remove an item, or keep shopping. So for now, the other thing we'll have to think about is, if the item isn't in my cart, I want to add it to the database. But if this user has this product in their cart already, we want to just increment the count. So if I have 4 in my cart, 4 becomes 5. We'll deal with that after. First, let's just insert one, see what happens. Okay. So we're going to create a new instance of a cart object. And we're going to populate it. So our album ID just comes from our input parameter, right? Whatever ID gets appended onto the end of the URL, that's the product ID. Now our cart ID is going to be a bit more complicated because I've already described the scenarios, right? We have different scenarios. If they're logged in, if they're not, if they already have items in their cart, if they don't. So just for starters, we'll just hard code in kind of a placeholder, and then we'll implement that logic once we can actually save an item to the database. So for now, we'll just say cart ID equals cart ID. We'll change this later. And for now, we'll just set the count equal to 1. Date created, we can use the .NET framework's date time class. It has a datetime.now, which gives us the current date and time. So we've created and populated a new object. We add our new item to the carts collection and commit that insert to the database. So this will save a new object. We've hard-coded 3 of the 4 properties. Right now, the only dynamic property is the album ID. We'll make the cart ID dynamic shortly. So then we want to show the cart page. So we'll return a redirect. Now, if we do this right now, we're going to get a 404 page because we don't have a shopping cart index view. We can create this just as an empty view, and then we'll populate it later. But just to avoid a 404, we should create a simple view. So inside of views, we created the controller. Visual Studio generates an empty shopping cart subfolder inside of views. So let's just create an empty view called index here. So I'll right click my views, shopping cart, add a view. And all I need to set out here is the name, which is index. Our template is empty. Yeah, we'll leave it as empty for now. Yeah, we'll just hand code this. We use our layout template and add it. So I'll just change the title and the heading to shopping cart. We'll get this blank page that just has a heading of shopping cart. And we'll populate this page later on. So let's give this a try here. So let's build. And see if we can put a couple of items in the cart. So I'm going to connect to my database. There's probably nothing in my cart table right now. So right now I've got nothing in there. So I'm going to try adding something to my cart. Okay, well, that's a good sign. We didn't get an error. We got redirected, which suggests our add to cart method was working. But the real test is there actually anything in here? And the answer is yeah. So it took our hard-coded cart ID, stored the album and the count, and time-stamped it. So if I go and put something else in, I now have 2 items in my cart. Now, obviously, this isn't going to really work. We've just hard-coded in the ID. So now we need to think about we basically have 3 scenarios, and I kind of flow charted these out so we can have a look. So every time the user adds to cart, here's what we need to decide. Number 1, do we already have a cart ID? If we do, we're just going to use that same ID in the session. So as one user shops, every item they put in their cart is linked together. That's one scenario. The second scenario is we don't have a cart ID. So in this case, it's the first item that's going in the cart. So then we need to make another decision. Do we know who they are? If we do, no problem. Let's just grab their username and we'll set the cart ID equal to their username. If we don't, the .NET framework has an ability for us to create a globally unique identifier. So we'll call that method to generate a unique ID. We'll store that value in the session, and that value will persist so long as the user session is open. So we kind of need to follow this workflow. And then we also will want to change it because right now we're adding a new item every time. So if I go ahead and add this same album again, rather than incrementing the count, it's going to put it in there twice. right? So I'm going to have album 609 with the same ID. We don't want that. This should just increment from 1 to 2. So we'll deal with the card ID and then we'll deal with this issue. So we need a method here. We'll call it get card ID. So we're going to first check our session to see if we have a card ID already. If we do, we don't need to do anything. So if our card ID is null, there's nothing in the current cart. So we're going down this path. We have no card ID, so then we're going to check this. And if we find it, we're going to store their username in session. So if our user is, now we're not checking for null because it actually evaluates to an empty string if they're anonymous. It is a string. So if we have no value in user.identity.name, we'll use the GUID class built into the framework. And it has a new GUID method. Oops. So this will give us a seemingly, kind of looks like a hashed or an encrypted value. Just a bunch of random letters and numbers, basically. And it's guaranteeing that we're unique. Doesn't matter if we have 5 million concurrent users on the server, all doing this all at once. It's guaranteeing each one is going to get a unique value. Otherwise, we'll just take the user.identity.name and assign that value to our session variable. So what we want to do now, before we do this, we want to call the get card ID method, right? We want to check if we don't have a current card ID, we need to generate one, either with the username or with the GUID. So now in here, our card ID can just be So if we already have a current session, this really does nothing. Just goes into that method and comes right back out. And where you just use the current value. So the unique ID will be session specific. But if they've logged in to shop, we're storing their email address. So every time they log in, they can come back to the cart and it will have saved whatever they've added to their cart previously. So these don't persist, which means if an anonymous user adds to cart but doesn't check out and leaves, we're going to have these things living in our cart table forever. Now, businesses typically, this is actually really useful information to a business. So we don't just want to delete it. We might want to delete it eventually. Why would it be useful for a business to see the items that anonymous users have put into their carts but never actually bought? What would that tell the business?
Or interest, or yeah, they might be interested, but maybe they don't like the price.
Yeah. So most kind of, if you go out and buy an existing shopping cart solution, most of them in the reporting, they have an abandoned cart report. So it shows you that because maybe that says, yeah, okay, enough people they like this enough to add it to cart, but if I'm seeing the same products in there a lot, like that report might do a total of how many of each item are in and order it from the ones that are most often put in the cart but not paid for. And maybe I think to myself, well, what would happen if I knocked the price down on that product? Obviously people are interested in it, but something's preventing people from buying it. So there's some business intelligence that's useful information to have. Now, we don't necessarily need it forever. Those reports are typically maybe businesses are interested in maybe the last 6 months or the last year. So typically there's some kind of cleanup function somewhere in the site that eventually will delete items older than whatever criteria our business owner wants, right? But because they're tracked with the time, we can easily do that. Take today's date and clean up, anything older than 6 months that's still sitting here. But we don't just want to delete them right away because that offers some useful information. So I'm going to try this again now. I'm going to compile, and I'm going to add to my cart a couple of items in Firefox as an anonymous user. Then I'm going to add a couple items in Chrome where I'm logged in with my Google account. I'll go to my store. So I'll add an item. So here's my globally unique identifier for my cart ID. But what I need to make sure now is if I add something else to the cart, I need to make sure it doesn't generate a new one, right? It needs to store that in the session and use it for all of my other transactions because we want them to be the same cart. It's one browser session. So our IDs are the same. You guys get the benefit. You didn't have to watch me suffer through 15 minutes of trying to fix this morning. When everyone I added had a new ID. I messed up my logic a bit. It took me a few fixes and some help from the students till we got to work it. Okay. So that's what happens when we're anonymous. I can keep adding. It uses that globally unique identifier. So what happens if we come over here to Chrome and shop as an authenticated user. So I'll log in with Google. That's interesting. All right, I'll log in with my customer account. Not sure why my Google login didn't work. I better look in my users table. I can't remember which login I used. I know I created a customer login last week, the week before. Customer@mail.com. We'll try that one. All right, I'll register another account. So this time when I add to cart, it uses my username. So this is better because this persists across browser sessions. As long as I log in, it will always show me whatever has been put in the cart previously. As an anonymous user, yes, you get your privacy, but your cart won't be saved. Okay, so we're getting there. So what we want to do now is, well, actually, we should change the logic here to update the quantity if that product already exists in our cart. We're always doing an insert. So before we do an insert, we should check if this user in this particular session in the current cart already has this product. And if so, we don't need to create a new item and we don't need to call add. We just need to identify that record and increment the count and call save. So check if this album already in this cart. I'm going to take out the word var here because we're going to declare car item up above. Cart item. So to run a query to look for one record, we can call single or default. Default means we won't get an error if it's not found. We'll just return an empty object. So in here, we need to pass in two values, the cart ID and the album ID. So we'll write our Lambda expression. Now, we need to set this value equal to our session cart ID toString. The problem is we can't use .toString inside of this link query syntax. That's a C# server-side method toString. It won't work as part of our query. So what we're going to have to do first is take this and just stick it into a local variable, and then we can inject the local variable in our query. I'll just call this maybe current cart ID. Then I can use using the session works here, but it won't work here. Whoops, and I missed a semicolon up there. So this will tell us if that item already exists in this user's cart or not. And now we can just wrap this part into an if statement. If our cart item is null, add it. Otherwise, just increment the count. So there's our add. Otherwise, we just increment the count property by 1. So save changes comes after. And save changes is going to run every time. Just a question of whether it's running an insert or an update. So now I should be able to add the same item. And instead of it creating a new record, it should increase the count if I do this. We'll try it. Now, when I build, every time you build, any session variables are lost. So I'm gonna get, the first time I add to cart, I'm gonna get another cart ID. So I'm going to put the same album in twice now. I want to make sure the first time it will insert and then the next time it will update and change from 1 to 2. So pick a different album. I was able to add to cart. So notice, even though it's the same browser session because I rebuilt, I have a different identifier from previously. If I go back and add it again, here's the real test. Hopefully it's not going to duplicate that line, but it's going to increment our count from 1 to 2. Okay, so that's the result we want. Here's the code again in the method. Any questions about our method? What we're doing? I will just show you again the importance of this local variable. If I try to use this inside of my query, it looks okay in my editor, but it will crash. That query will crash when I run it in my browser, which I will prove, because we can't call toString inside of this. So I'll just go back. And this was the error I was generating that took us a while to fix this morning. With a little help from Stack Overflow, we resolved it. So it doesn't like me calling toString inside of those query parameters. So our simple fix was call toString first and set it in a local variable, and then with the local variable we can inject. So now we can insert an item, we can update the quantity. So our next task is to populate our index view. Right now, it just takes the user to a page that says shopping cart. We want to actually show them the contents of the cart. So on our index, we want to run a query, get the current user's shopping cart, and pass those query results to our view. And then we need to set an IEnumerable model on the view and write the code to output and display it. So let's call get cart ID. The user could go straight to the cart page. We'll build a cart link in the nav bar. Someone can come to the site, click on cart. And if they've logged in and shopped before, there could be values in there. We'll use our cart model and we'll run a query with a where clause. What value do we need to pass in? Yeah, cart ID, exactly. Now again, we've got the same issue where we can't use a toString method. So we probably want, again, a local variable we can inject here. So I'll use the same one. I probably should have camel cased. Oh, that's okay. What the heck? This way. To get the ID from the session, store it in a local variable, query the database, and pass that list of cart items to the view. So now we need to go back to our index method. We need to declare the model at the top that's IEnumerable. We'll build a table heading and we'll display a loop, all the rows of cart items. So go back to shopping cart index. On line 1, we need to declare the model. We'll create an HTML table. What columns do you think we should put on our cart page? What information will users want to see about what's in their cart? Okay, so we could have maybe a album, yeah, a quantity. Okay, I think that's a good list. Okay, yep, so we'll do that. Let's get them displayed, and yeah, and then we'll have a footer row, and we'll show them the total. So we'll do that next, Roman. I think that's a good idea. So what we want to do here is before we pass it, we can write a simple query that will do all the math and calculate it in one line. We can maybe stick that in the view bag. Just pass that as a variable to the view, and we can display that. So we'll come back to that. It's a good idea. So now we need a for each loop after our header row. We'll create we'll show the album title in the first column. We'll show the count in the second column, and a.album.price. So this value comes directly from the cart table, and these come from the album table because we don't store the price and title in the cart table. Now we'll have to add some formatting to this. Make sure you build because we've modified the index method with this logic. And now if we add some items to the cart, we should be able to see what's in there. So now I add to cart, it shows me. If I go back and add something else. So we're getting there. If I put the same album in again, right, it increments. So we want to do a few other things. We want to generate and show a subtotal, as Roman said. We should format this as currency. We'll want to be able to give people the ability to remove from cart. We want to give them a checkout button. We also should add a link in our nav bar. One small problem, one other thing we need to deal with is, well, actually, we'll deal with that in a minute. So let's open up our layout. Let's just add a link inside of shared layout. We'll deal with this quickly and then we'll take a break. So let's add a link. So users can go to the cart anytime. The link will say cart. It loads the index method of our shopping cart controller. So no matter where they are on the site, they can get to their cart. If the only way to get to it is by adding a new item, that's kind of a problem. So I just added line 26 here. So now I've got my cart page, which is good. I can go back here. The only issue, which we'll have to fix, is when I'm in a new window here. I'm not logged in. I'm in a different session because I'm private. When I click cart, what should happen when a user goes to the cart page if there are no items in the cart? You want to show them? Should it look like this? Yeah, so let's just put a quick check in the view that evaluates the number of items in our cart. If our model is empty, we want to hide this and show a message. So let's do that. One quick if statement and we'll take a break. So in here, this whole thing we're going to wrap in an if statement, right? So if our model.count, which is a method, is equal to 0, you can get it to say whatever you want. And then our table I'm going to wrap inside of an else. We'll deal with the other changes we talked about after. So the cart total, remove, checkout buttons. So the table only shows up if our model has at least one album in it. So it should work the same way when there's something in the cart, but now if I come over here, I get a message instead. Okay, it's time for us to take a pause. Let's take a break until, let's take 20 minutes. I will upload what I've done so far to GitHub and stop our video stream. You guys feel free to take a break. I gotta step out for a few minutes.